Good evening. I would like to welcome everyone to this brief overview of the Synoptic Gospels. In this presentation, I will be discussing the following topics: the Synoptic Gospel controversy, the reliability of the Gospels, eyewitness accounts, and the authorship timeline of the Synoptic Gospels. The word synoptic has two parts: syn, which means together or similar, and optic, meaning sight or view. There are three synoptic gospels which were written by Matthew, Mark, and Luke. These three gospels are similar to each other and often overlap. The Gospel of John is not considered a synoptic gospel because 90% of the material contained in John is original. There is controversy over who wrote the first gospel. Consensus among biblical scholars is that Mark's gospel was written first. This is known as the Markan priority. Mark's Gospels were less polished. Matthew and Luke appear to be smoothing over Mark's writings, meaning his grammar and writings were not as sophisticated as the other two. Through the years, the reliability of the Gospels has been questioned. Critics state that memory and oral traditions are inaccurate. Oral traditions and memory is the way that information and stories were passed from generation to generation in the first century. Any inaccuracies in the Gospels would have been disputed due to the many eyewitnesses of Jesus' life that would have still been alive when these oral accounts were told. John and Matthew were eyewitnesses to the life of Jesus and were written from first-hand accounts. The Gospel of Luke and Mark were written from research and interviews of eyewitnesses, or what's been called living memory. Luke was a companion of the Apostle Paul and wrote primarily to the Greeks. He was the only Gentile writer of the New Testament. Mark, on the other hand, was a disciple of Peter and wrote to the Romans. Matthew wrote primarily to the Jews, and John wrote to all men. The Synoptic Gospels offer different views of the same Jesus. One author, Lydia McGrew, an analytic philosopher specializing in formal and classical theory of knowledge and testimony and the philosophy of religion, stated in her book, Hidden in Plain View, suggested that Gospels are historically accurate because they rest on eyewitness testimony. Her book describes incidental details that are actual accounts of eyewitnesses and not the result of a hoax. Other accounts from historians such as Tacitus, Pliny the Younger, Polybius, and Josephus all add to the credibility of the Gospels. All three Gospels tell many of the same accounts, so they overlap. The overlapping of the Synoptic Gospels indicate that they give an accurate account of Jesus' life and ministry. There are differences in the Gospels' accounts which only add to their credibility. This is expected in eyewitness accounts. Personally, at one point in my career, I was a police officer investigating crime scenes. Often, there were multiple witnesses to the crime who gave their testimony. If all the testimonies were identical, I would suspect that there was collusion or fraud because no two people would see the same incident identically. Additionally, the Gospels report miracles performed by Jesus. Critics say that the problem with the biblical miracles is the same as the miracles today: the lack of reliable eyewitnesses. However, that argument does not stand up because of the hundreds of millions of witnesses today that have been or experienced divine healings, such as healing blindness or even raising from the dead. The time frame of the writings of the Synoptic Gospels are also questioned, but most scholars feel that they were written before the destruction of the temple in 70 AD. The destruction of the temple is not mentioned in the Synoptic Gospels. The Gospel of John in the book of Acts is considered to be the last gospel written. It does not mention anything about the destruction of the temple or Nero's persecution of the Christians in 64 AD, or the death of James, Paul, and Peter, all of which happened prior to the destruction of the temple in 70 AD. Therefore, many historians feel that the Synoptic Gospels were written prior to this time. In 70 AD, there were many eyewitnesses of Jesus' life still alive to give firsthand accounts of the writings of the Synoptic Gospels. In conclusion, There's a mountain of evidence and accounts by eyewitnesses and historians to prove that the Synoptic Gospels are not just stories or myths, but accurate accounts of the ministry of Jesus Christ. I hope you enjoyed learning more about the validity and historicity of the Synoptic Gospels. Shalom.